But Richard Verbs, he's basically he just mentioned about like he got demonetized a while ago, so his channel, even though he's got like 250,000 viewers, it's not monetized, so he only relies on sort of like donations. Um, I don't even know if they can donate through the platform. If he's demonetized, like all those super chats and stuff like that. I don't really know about all that type of thing. Um, I'm not really an advocate of monetization anyway. Surely it would help, but my channel got demonetized before it got removed. Um, Quite a long time before it got removed. Saying that we don't demonetize those, we don't monetize those kind of channels, right? Um, I'm starting to think that the main political parties, like Labour and the Tories, any anyone who's like succeeding quite well and touches on political matters that could get a strong following and rally people towards any cause what might be useful in opposition against the government, right? I think the government are pulling the strings in the background, just like they did with Russell Brand. Russell Brand is a very influential person, and he was monetized, right? That Lucy Fraser, the Secretary of State for Media at the time, well, she's lost her position anyway. I think she was the Cambridge MP. She was the one mainly responsible for Russell Brand getting demonetized, and now he's actually been charged with that accusation since then. It's quite a long time ago now, actually, right? Time's flown for them to get evidence and decide what they're going to do with it, right? But even though I'm not the greatest fan of what's happening to the world through YouTube anyway, all this kind of like everyone sort of becoming minor celebrities and everyone kind of like all this kind of, like, I mean, if I had, like, if I did have a channel with like, hundreds of thousands of people, I just wouldn't have time to read the comments, right? And maybe people can just have a good time in there and chat themselves. They don't need me to comment. But who are they talking to? Now, if I had a channel and I had like, 100 people or 200, and I think my channel I had about 5,000, right? I can remember when I put a Dexter's Laboratory episode up on there, right? Just because it was making a point out of something, right? I wanted to make a political point, right? And I put it up. And I remember some kids were just commenting in there, right? Or I don't know if they were kids, but they were just like, probably teenagers or whatever. But he just like watched Dexter's Lab, and it obviously entertained him, and he found it amusing, and it was like he was just saying like, oh, that little bit when he does this or that was quite funny, right? It was just like socializing and kind of sharing something that he liked about it. And it kind of really touched me, and I'm like, oh, someone would have bothered to comment on my video, and like it was kind of like we had a little rapport about the cartoon that we could share magic moments about it together, sort of a little bit like that. Like we both appreciate the cartoon, and it was just like, it was just a nice gesture, right? And I never really get comments like that much. And it is valuable, right? And when YouTube pulled that video, right, and I lost all those comments, I was absolutely furious. I was like, it really upset me. And the fact that YouTube regard us all as like a statistic, a number, just like, a flick, a fly, a flea, an ant, right? They don't care about people's feelings, but they claim. YouTube's bold claim is that, oh, we're here to protect the community, right? To protect people from getting harmed or upset. But they're so reckless in their platform operations that they are upsetting people and hurting them as much or if not more than their comments, which it totally evades the point of having, standards and protections. Now, they give themselves immunity, right, in the copyright claims. Oh, it's nothing to do with us, it's to do with Party A and Party B, right? We won't get prosecuted, right? So they don't think that they should be responsible or liable for things that are done on their platform when it's another party's copyright, right? So already they're saying, "Oh, it's nothing to do with us," they don't want to be liable or bothered for anything that happens to copyright. And the only reason that standards and law even exists on platforms, right, is because there is law, right? If there wasn't any laws, then no one would get prosecuted and there couldn't be like a basis why or why not a certain thing shouldn't be on there, right? Or else it's purely like, a person's house, what they do and don't like. It's not legal. And that's the thing with the petition law and rights, that law can't be used against you. You can't be prosecuted. You can't legally, in law in a court, be charged with anything or offend anyone, right? So YouTube aren't legally liable if you had a petition site anyway, because they can't be prosecuted criminally, right? And you can. So it's all about, what they want on their platform and what they don't want. And that comes down to like a newspaper. What does a newspaper want in there or not? Well, this is why America has freedom of the press, because if you have newspapers, what happens if every single newspaper was Republican? Then they just wouldn't have Democrat stuff in there. And then it's all to do with who owns what, and then you've got a monopoly on something. And then you could just go into the village and say, this is a Labour council and we're not having any Conservative posters on the notice board in the village, right? I think the American law was the freedom of the press. It's not meant to be that the press can write whatever they want. The freedom of the press is meant to be that it should be accessible to everyone, so that everyone can have their say and their voice, like at a public meeting. At a public meeting, anyone can attend and they can't be removed, and they can transact information, and it cannot be obstructed from being transacted. My opinion is that if you, and I probably need to, I should do this, if you trace back the American Constitution and get all the old books out, like I've done with the English law and the usage of Parliament and all the old Erskine May books and Herbert Broom books and all of it, and I don't think many Americans are doing this. Some of them do, but I don't think that many of them are doing, because I know what their general knowledge is generally when it comes to rights and things like that, which is not very extensive, right? It's not very detailed or extensive. I think that American Constitution, when they said that it's a freedom of the press, I think that it was done like the Public Meeting Act, but on paper, right? Like the Public Meeting Act, right? Where you have a legal right to transact when it's to do with the public without being obstructed. And then obviously certain privileged material cannot be legally challenged. Because really, a newspaper guy wouldn't want something in there because he was legally liable, but he can't be legally liable. So it's all a matter of, what they want in there. But this is the thing. How do they know what their readers want to read, and what people might not want to read about fatal accidents that massacre and mash up everything and blood everywhere, but they might put them in there and they might have to listen to them. Oh, we've got a right to report it. So it's all about, the thing with these big platforms is they're not very democratic. You don't vote for the people who run them, like, Neil Mohan or, whatever, Sergey Brin. They're privately owned, but they want to engage in the public sphere and actually become the main platform of the public sphere. And this is what, Jimmy Dawes talking about. So, and with Verbs, Verbs, right, he accumulated, 20,000 and then 50,000 and then 100,000 followers, and now he's on like about 250,000, right, or something. He even says it there, right, 258k, right. He got the YouTube award. He's got it on his wall behind him still now, the YouTube Awards. So, if YouTube... I think YouTube have got loads of these. I think I saw that Mr. Beast guy at YouTube headquarters, and they're just all on the wall, So they've got someone making loads of them, They're all probably piled up in a warehouse, like, in a unit, like, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that, YouTube have handmade it and gold-plated it or anything like that, but... to receive something from YouTube and from to send it out to you and, even have your address or whatever, Verbs has got it on the wall behind him, right? But then he got demonetized. So they're not, it's like, oh yeah, we like your channel's doing very good. Well done, Mr. Verbs, right? He's a YouTube award, and then they say, oh, but we're not, we're going to demonetize. What's the point in having a YouTube award on your wall? Haven't you done well? And then demonetizing you, it's kind of pointless. It's almost kind of like shaking your hand and then nutting you or something like that. But they did the same to Russell Brand. But I've noticed that these persons are kind of like, they've got a little bit of muscle in the political sphere, right? Now, this is the problem, right? You see, you see all these kids' channels, Coco Melon, Mr. Beast, all these channels are, making loads of money, and then, they're right in with YouTube headquarters. They've got all these rapports between them. They're abiding by all the rules, and they're like, promoting all these certain trends and themes that YouTube like and want them to do. Setting an example for the world the way that YouTube and Google want them to be their kind of like flagship channels. Otherwise, they wouldn't be their flagship channels, right? And the thing is that I think that the American government and the British government, right, really don't like any real serious challenge to their political parties, right? And I don't know when they had these policies or whatever for monetization, right? But firstly, when channels become, if your channel's standardly monetized, right, or like, you start it and it's all automatically like that, or you're eligible to it, to take monetization away or to ban it is a legal action or legal motion. Now, any legal action or motion done by a policy must be able to be followed up in court, right? Because otherwise they can't enforce it, right? Because if you take them to court, then they have to go to court, right? They have to turn up, and they have to be able to prove it or get it put through in law. Now, if this person agreed to a policy, but you can't, through the 1688 Bill of Rights for political matters for petitioning, right? They can't get you to agree to a agreement or policy, right? Because it is an action imposed against you by an other party, right? You can't have a verbal agreement, right, for a policy, because to get you to agree to something is actually imposing on your political rights to try to coerce you to agree with something legally binding, right? Legally binding. They're trying to make you do a legally binding verbal agreement. That's a contempt. If you look at the petition rules, which I've got now for Parliament, right, any other person who brings an action against someone or a legal motion to obstruct you, it's a contempt, right? So for YouTube to get you to agree to the policy, right, if you've got a petition channel, is a contempt. If they come up with a policy which is to say that, we don't even have petition channels on there, right, that's a contempt as well, because everything to do with a policy and law is legal, right? You can't have a policy unless you get someone to agree with it, right? And that agreement this is why people sign contracts and so forth, user agreement or whatever, but you can't have a user agreement. This is the thing. And I think that's what the freedom of the press comes down to in the Constitution of America. The Constitution of America, the freedom of the press, would forbid there to be a user agreement, a verbal contract or a written contract or anything, which would by the word bind, because when you arrest someone, it's called binding them, right? So if you try to get someone to a civil agreement, that's like a civil binding, right? They're trying to bind you. And I think that's what the freedom of the press is in America. You can't be legally bound. And particularly if you're going to petition Congress or United States government, for sure. And in England, by the time of 1911, they just like blanketed that onto political speech generally. So I don't know what those cases in America with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right, when he was with that Judge Thompson, right, and he lost, but she was wrong. That Judge Thompson was wrong, and Donald Trump actually, he should overturn it. Donald Trump, he should overturn that. He's got the power to now as president, because I figured it out, and it is freedom of the press means that the press cannot have a binding legal contract or agreement which you would have to comply with, at least if you're doing federal, casework or something like that. Possibly even in a state as well. Like Stop Cop City or whatever. If you're put in a newspaper, So that's it. And this is what I don't like about it, right? I know the government are involved in it. It's not just Sergey Brin or Neil Mohan or whatever. There's some deeper cogs in the machinery behind the scenes, right? Particularly with like Tony Blair, Keir Starmer, the Tory party, and I'll explain to you why and how that is because if you look at Jacob Rees-Mogg and GB News and Reform, the Reform Party very quickly appeared and then took off, but only because they set up that GB News channel and heavily featured them, and they had Neil Oliver on there. They tried to make it look like it was a mixed bag, like they were catering for all parties. But they heavily prominently featured Nigel Farage, Tice, that Lee Anderson, Esther McVeigh, and then they've got Rees-Mogg. Now, Rees-Mogg for sure broke the election rules. Now, not just from what Ofcom investigated him, and there was a big scandal with that because the Department of Culture, Media and Sport got involved with that actually, but not honestly or fully. And Mogg did actually, I don't know if he got fined or if he got found to have breaking the rules, but they didn't ban him from going on there. And he did actually lose his seat in Parliament. But this is the thing. It says that you can't be an entertainer. And that's been all the way back from the start of voting since it existed, and all the way through the 1600s, and there's lots of laws around the same time as the 1688 Bill of Rights, and then you get the reform. You get the Great Reform Act in the 1830s, and then you get the Representation of the People Acts and everything like that, right? And then they start focusing on broadcasting and things like that, but they're allowed to be invited onto news, but only because they've got the privilege of being an elected person who the news would want on, right? They're not allowed to provide entertainment, and Rees-Mogg is, because it's a show, right? It's a show, and as for McVeigh as well, a woman. No, you won't prosecute a woman. Well, I don't care if you're a man or a woman. You provide entertainment, right? And this needs to stop. And what I've also realised is that when they used to do it to Parliament, you didn't have to pay because Parliament's free, right? But when they in 1868, when they did election petitions, quite a lot of people were doing petitions to government. A lot of them contesting elections, but it was £1,000. You had to pay £1,000. Now who's going to pay that? Now, who even goes to an election? Who even turns up at one and watches the counting of the ballots at the town hall or wherever they do it? I don't know anyone who. I'd love to know what private persons have contested elections in the last 10 years, right? Now, in America, they did with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but only because it was for the presidency. It was like an individual, like, a person. And all the spotlights were on them, and the opposing party wanted to try, pull them on anything they could pull them on, and they got some people to do it, and they had full backing with all lawyers. Actually, in America, I found out that they do have a process like Parliament in England, where the government are supposed to do it, can act on it themselves, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s submission had been accepted, so he was led to believe that it was okay, right? It should have been the equivalent of like a parliamentary investigation, but in America, right? Not a private individual bringing it. The Americans must have copied the English system at some point, and like with that, saying that you can do election petitions, they must have copied it at one point. Although it wasn't, and I never heard the Kennedy case being an election petition. It was just they just went to a federal court or whatever. Heard it right. So and the thing is that all this Rees-Mogg, right? Rees-Mogg is getting paid an absolute fortune for doing these shows, right? He's getting silly money, like, thousands per show, right? He's getting hundreds of thousands of pounds thrown at him, right? Professor Tim Wilson was talking about it. Now, he's effectively himself is monetized. He's getting paid, right? He's going on the show, he's entertaining everyone, and he's personally monetized as Jacob Rees-Mogg, right? He's making a killing of money, and he's even, he's getting to influence people. He's probably making out that he's not, but now he's not an MP. He's entertaining people, and he's touching on political subjects, right? And he can choose what stories to comment on or not, and he can always have his own words and opinions, right? Regardless of whatever Ofcom want to scrutinise that, it doesn't matter because he's not an MP now, right? But the thing is, as a platform, right? If GB News are monetized or not, I don't know that, or whether it's just fully privately funded through advertisements and sponsorship, right? Because they probably won't need to be. They won't need any money from YouTube, right? Because while GB News is like sponsored, it's all corporate sponsored and adverts and stuff like that. I think I only watch it on YouTube, but I think it's on the TV as well. Mogg is getting money. He's not banned from receiving money, right? Rees-Mogg is not. Ofcom don't go to him and say, "Oh, Jacob, we're demonetizing you because you're touching on political subjects and we don't like it because you're steering the country. Starmer's meant to be controlling the country, not you, right?" But what Brand, right? They're taking all his money from him and YouTube, right? Now YouTube might say, well, if we don't monetize GB News, right? Brand's getting his money from some, whatever his private affairs, and so is Mogg, right? But Mogg is, people watch GB News because it's on YouTube, right? And Mogg is getting paid because he's attracting people on YouTube, not just on TV, because people don't hardly watch. In fact, they watch YouTube on TV now, don't they? Just on the YouTube thing, not like through whatever channel 63 or whatever it is, right? George Galloway might have something to say about this, but I think YouTube are trying to they're trying to anyone political gets demonetized. That's unfair because Mogg is on there, right, and he's exerting political influence. He's getting a hell of a lot of money. Now, where does it matter where you're getting money from? YouTube have allowed it on, right, and Mogg's getting loads of money. Now, if it wasn't on, you couldn't watch Mogg. Now, either you can watch Mogg and he can influence you or not, but he's still getting money somehow, right? So why does it matter whether YouTube give Mogg the money or whether some private sponsors give him the money? Because he's still getting paid loads of money and he's still on there influencing people, right? Now, I think that YouTube, right? Sergey Brin, Neil Mohan, whatever, YouTube, right? Google. It's not really any of their business to say, oh, what kind of channel are you? Oh, you're touching on political stuff. We're going to take your money away from you. Because that is the essence of discrimination, Either everyone's got a right to, the thing is, if you're allowed on there or you're not, right? They can't really stop people going on there politically because it is a contempt, right? Or else we wouldn't. Well, I'm not on there. My channel's been taken down. But if you touch on political matters, right, then you're on there or you aren't. Now, this is where you come to the agreement, right? They're making you abide by an agreement, but if you're advertising on through Google Ads, right, you can select that it is political, and then you've got to provide your ID, and you get put on a special acknowledgement. But they're not doing that for normal channels, but yet it exists in law, right? Um, I If you got a proper judge in America, right, or even the president, I mean, Donald Trump, I mean, this is what Donald Trump is saying through his video statement that I got on my website on the main page, right? The freedom of the press means that no one shall be discriminated, really, who uses it. That's the freedom, right? But we're not talking about, discrimination, kind of saying like, you can't come on because you're a man, or you can't come on because you're a woman, or you can't come on because you're political. Well, I think that's the point of freedom of the press. They're not allowed to discriminate against someone. It's meant to be, everyone can use it. It's like the public meeting. It's like, whatever. That's meant to be the essence of the public. But you don't need to say, oh, this is a protected, characteristic. That is. They already kind of had that in a way. This is the thing that I think a lot of nupties in America, all the woke crew, the Biden crew, don't get their head around. They want it spelled out in the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like, race, a protected characteristic, religion, a protected characteristic, sex, a protected characteristic. They got to write them all out like a baby book, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, right? It says freedom of the press shall be free. That means no one shall be discriminated against. They're all protected characteristics. Go through them one by one because they're all protected. Anyone can use the press, or else they are being discriminated against. Any characteristic is discriminated against if it's not free to use the press, unless there's a specific law in the Constitution or in a state about it, which there can't really be for petitions, except for certain regulations that have got to be complied with when they're having an election, just to make sure that it's run properly and fair. Now, if they're saying, well, that's the case, to make it fair, no political groups can be monetized, but that's discriminating against, so Charity can make money, or, Mr. Beast can make money, but if I want to do a political cause, I can't make money. It is still a form of discrimination, and it's not freedom of the press, right? How political... The Value Added Tax Act, as 99.4, has got political bodies, right? And it can be a small one or a big one. You don't get a big one unless it started off as a small one, right? And they're exempt from VAT, which means that they're allowed to get money, right? And they're allowed to give things away. You can't give things away if you ain't got anything, right? So it's accounted for in the law. It's your legal right, to raise money and give things away for a political cause, except when there's an election on, right? Because the elections are run by the government, right? But the petitions are free because it's like it's kind of like it's an independent campaign. It's not a government organised thing. You've got to make your effort and use your own money for it, right? Or people can donate to it. And if people are allowed to do... This is the thing, right? I think this is the thing that YouTube can't get their head around, right? If it was illegal to take donations for a political cause, then they'd be able to say, oh, we're demonetizing you. Why? Because it's illegal, right? But it's not. It's not illegal, is it? It's lawful. You can take donations and you can give people things, right? So that means it's lawful, and that means it's not illegal. Unless you're actually for a major political party, which is why Jacob Rees-Mogg's not a bit an entertainer, right? Now, so what they're actually what YouTube and the government have connived to do with Lucy Fraser and Keir Starmer, unless he does something about it now, is they cunningly and cleverly done secret handshake deals and likely with, 77th Brigade or whatever behind the scenes, right? And they're demonetizing people like Verbs and Russell Brand who are gathering a strong political force which could flourish into a large political movement or party, right? And they're snipping it. And they say, no, we're not monetizing this type of thing, right? Yet, they haven't said, oh, Jacob Rees-Mogg can't be on there on GB News, or he's not allowed to be paid to be on there. Esther McVeigh can't receive any money, have they? Right? And how has reform even existed or even got to where it is with a couple of MPs in Parliament? Because it were on there, right? And this is what I don't like about Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg is as far as I'm concerned, no matter what, he's still on there as well, posing with a photograph. This man has got bigger testicles than anyone. He's pure Dutch courage, right? The purest Dutch courage ever, right? This man is a career criminal because he's got no shame. He's all money. He was meant to retire quiet to an island like Scaramanga, and we never hear about Rees-Mogg again. But he flipped the coin the other way, and he went on TV. Now he's a megastar. He's earning thousands per show, like he's raining money on him, right? And he got there through corrupt process. He should be in prison, Rees-Mogg. Rees-Mogg should be in prison. Russell Brand shouldn't be facing charges. Mogg should be facing charges. Esther McVeigh, you wouldn't a woman, would you, right? Oh, she's a woman MP, we can't charge her, right? It's a woman. This is the thing. It's a woman. It's a woman. We can't call her out on it. This is the thing. Or whatever. So it's like, they're all corrupt, pure corruption. Mogg should have been taken to the cleaners by Ofcom on all that older legislation, which is still in principle, and Mogg's still on there, influencing through his own ways and raking money in. And Brand isn't getting any money really from YouTube. He's having to get it through his other enterprises. And then people like Verbs, who have got a very strong political influence, but he doesn't officially have a party, they're saying they're not going to give him any money, right? Which is completely wrong. It's heavily discriminative. And what I've learned now is that for petitions, it's a contempt of Parliament, right? Or every single strike against my channel for copyright was a contempt against the High Court of Parliament. And I know that for a fact. So every single YouTube strike that I've ever had against that channel is each instance is a contempt. And YouTube have got their little American law which says that they won't be treated as a third party, whatever. They won't be treated as the other party when they claim it. But this is the thing. That's only the copyright claim. YouTube are the one who invented strikes, and YouTube action the strike. Now, a person pulling a wooden lever in Alaska didn't trigger a strike against you, did he? Right? Someone in Russia drinking vodka in a bar didn't pull a lever and action a strike against you. It's YouTube's mechanism. It's YouTube. It's their system, right? Now, I don't care if another party, right? When it's even if YouTube trying to make out that all those other parties, Warner Brothers have done the contempt instead, then, right? It's Warner Brothers are in contempt, Universal Studios are in contempt, or Lucasfilm are in contempt, or whatever, right? But not YouTube. I think the law's different for contempt. Surely, it says that they won't be treated as a third party in a copyright claim, right? It doesn't say that they won't be treated like a third party in a contempt, because that's a crime. It's not a civil matter. If you're in court, right, and you're in there on a civil charge, right, and if you suddenly stand up and swear at the judge, right, then that becomes criminal, right? It's not civil. So therefore, when YouTube, right, enter a contempt, it's no longer civil matter between, Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm and yourself. It's actually a crime of contempt. So every single copyright strike against my channel is a separate, individual contempt charge, right? And that's just the way it is. And when you log into that platform and sign up, firstly, their lawyer cannot sit there with a pen and write a policy which would put any user into a verbal binding contract, which itself will be a contempt against that user, right? That is a crime, a contempt crime in England. So whatever lawyers YouTube have got that sit down and write a pen that, person 1, 2, or 3, X, Y, or Z goes up to a computer, logs in, starts a channel, right? This is from my petition. If that YouTube policy states that anything is binding against that is a contempt, so they can't have it. And that's what I've worked out now that I know that it's contempt, right? So YouTube, YouTube are hiding in America at the moment. They've got Google offices and a YouTube office, but they're keeping a low profile. The staff in England, I wrote to them, and they're in contempt. They haven't put my channel back up. They haven't restored it or anything, right? They need to be prosecuted for contempt, whether they like it or not. It is a serious offence. It's more serious than the charges that Russell Brand's facing now, that don't even really have any substantial evidence, and they're only based on people's statements and memory from a long time ago, right? So it's YouTube are in America, but they extradited. They wanted to extradite Julian Assange to America to face charges for serious crimes, right? But how are we going to extradite, Neil Mohan and Carola Vasquez, right, from YouTube, or Sergey Brin to England to face charges? Because Parliament really couldn't give a monkey's chuff. Parliament have not done anything to try and get my YouTube channel back for me, even though it's a contempt of that place. They really couldn't care less about us. It's like, support with no support. The petitions committee are all airs and graces. It's like roll out the red carpet. It's like, all they want to do is like, it's kind of like, it's like drama school. All they want to do is call each other right and honourable all day. And about 25% of what comes out of the mouth is, airs and graces. And the meat and vegetables in the debate, like, the substance of what they're debating and arguing, it could be debated by a primary school teacher. They haven't done any technical research, any numbers, any legislation or facts. And they definitely don't want to talk about it or mention it in the debate. It is a baby debate. It's like complete and utter pointless. And it upsets me to say that. Because, like Jamie Stone, right? He does this, like, video when they open the petitions committee, and he's got his, like, thick glasses on, and, like, he's very presentable, and he's like some kind of clerk of parliament, and I'm like, I like this. I don't dislike Jamie Stone. I don't, but it's like you can look presentable and even, graceful and but all of the accent and language and the shenanigans, it might as well be the circus, or you see the speaker plays on that now. He's got this little theme tune, the speaker in the red corner, Lindsay Oil from Charlie Lancashire, doing an advertisement for Betfred. It's kind of this cockfighting pit in a pub type tip me hat sort of, ye old parliament-y kind of like the Artful Dodger sort of thing going on with, the corner speaker, kind of like trying to be a bit streetwise, but in the sort of, I don't know, a little bit like David Beckham when he wears, David Beckham is, proper, absolutely loaded and rich, but he's got all these Ferrari, he's got all this, top sports cars, like Pink Floyd or whatever, and the mansions and that. But, and, there's all the Chanel adverts, but kind of walks around with like the, flat cap on, like, oh, I'm a working class lad type thing, a little bit like that. But speak in the right corner. There's always a proper fighting match going on here, right? This is the thing, but in those meetings, it's like, you might as well, get the famous Five book out or something, or, Huckleberry Finn or something. The women MPs in that debate, right? It's like if you go to the Samaritans or something and get like a help form out, just reading through the basics. Now, there's nothing to say that debates shouldn't be accessible and presentable for the average person, right? But not to the extent where it's just pointless doing it. They hadn't researched the legislation. They didn't lay out the facts and law to us. They didn't give us the full spectrum of options. And they sidelined on loads of things which were completely not relevant. Choosing to complain and grumble at the foreign interference when every single one of the policies they're putting through Parliament are like, these C40 cities or, from the World Economic Forum or whatever, which are all foreign policies. And then, you don't need foreign influence to affect petition signatures when your MPs are already, directly introducing legislation themselves from abroad, from their pals in all these, WHO and WEF and whatever. They go there, have meetings, and come back with all these laws they've all conjured up with foreigners in foreign countries. And then they dare say that, foreigners help share the petition or whatever. They're not thinking about what they're doing or saying, really. It's not up to the standards. And then the thing with the Petitions Committee is, we're relaxing the rules, we're modernising them, we're making it informal, loosen your shirt up, slacken the language, you don't need to use all the airs. But ironically, they took away the requirement to open the petition with the proper address and the proper right and honourable, and then the humbleness and all the prayers and that, right? But yet, when they go into the Petitions Committee meeting, then they're throwing it all in. Oh, I'm very honoured to have, for you, it's an honour for me to be present in your, I'm standing before the chair of this committee. It's such an honour to be debating in front of the chair of this committee. I couldn't do enough ego stroking, and my right honourable friend here most definitely is correct. They're saying it. What makes someone, right, respectful is saying it, right? You use the word, and then you can say, the respectful gentleman here, blah, 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 but I'm giving evidence that, I think he's wrong, and it could even be false and lies, whatever, right? But to be honourable, you do it. So they're saying it. They're going through the motions. But what the procedure committee said is that for us, they're scrapping it, right? So what they're actually doing is that they're removing our etiquette because now it's informal. We don't need it. But they're continuing to use the etiquette in the debate, and aren't they so right and honourable and airy and gracie? Aren't they to be respected and right all the time, right? But we can't be, because they said you don't use that anymore, right? So what you're left with in the petition is just like, straight directives, change line 7 on, Act 52 or whatever, right? But that's not informal. That is like computer coding, which is formal, because computer coding has to be precise and correct, or it won't work, right? And that's what the standards are. This is not right. It has to be written like that. They're actually trying to make it more like a computer coding program, which couldn't be more formal. Computer coding programs have strict rules which are required, and that's what the Petitions Committee are actually imposing on us, right? Yeah, they're claiming, oh, it's casual now. Tosh, it's not casual. They want it to be up to their standards and honourable when it is like codified and correct and precise without any character and substance of you. But yet in the rules it's always talking about character and substance. Yeah, it's character and substance when it's from you, not from a bot, and they've removed all our words which communicate and which cast the honourability of it into effect by saying it, right? They removed all that. So now they can say, well, what's left? It's like, send me a computer. You might as well just send them some kind of app or something. This is the thing. And what rules actually have been relaxed are like, the main rule: a member must not present a petition from himself. Right? Why? Well, if they would, this is the thing: a member must not present a petition from himself. And now they can. So they relaxed that rule. That was a really important rule. Oh well, shame. So they've made it very informal for themselves in process wise, and extremely strict for us. But this is the thing. That rule, you can't scrap that rule, because like I said, right, in the other video, if you follow that basis that they can suddenly magically present petitions for themselves, from themselves, not for themselves, from themselves, but they're blocking at least 50% of our petitions, if not more, then, they might as well. You've suddenly allowed the possibility of a situation where it's now possible. I'm not saying that it's now before, as opposed to it was not possible to happen, right? Now it's possible that they could reject everyone's petitions and then just present their own, right? Which before, that would not have been possible because they couldn't present any. So you can see which way they're going with it. Like I said, presenting the petition from themselves surely is the same area of legality as whether the Speaker is allowed to represent the Labour Party while he's been the Speaker. Because then he could just say, oh, well, we'll just, we'll talk about Labour Party policies all day and the Tory ones, right? Because now I can do that, right? Well, now we won't listen to anyone else's petitions, we'll just do his own, because now I can do it, Well, the Speaker would be able to do that if he didn't have to withdraw from partisan politics. So this is the thing, right? This is but they're just gradually, and the thing is, the way they're doing it, right, is that there's some very clever strategists behind it, right? People like Rees-Mogg, right? It's people like Rees-Mogg, right, who are doing it, right? But they they don't actually really know what they're doing, right? And how can I say that is that there are some MPs, right, who are kind of not quite as savvy, not quite as focused. Maybe they've got too many other things to concentrate on, or they're naive, or whatever. They've got too much brain fog. Maybe Carla Denyer. She's not stupid. She's an intelligent woman, but she's a very trusting woman. She's not like what's Mog up to. The scoundrel. This is the thing. They might be walking around, Parliament with a pie, or they might be going to the strangers bar and getting a pint, that they might not quite be all there, right? And then you've got Dominic Cummings going, oh, well, they don't need to be there because it's all written down and scripted for them anyway, so as long as they stick to the script, it doesn't matter, right? But there are sharks amongst, and it's those sharks, people like Mog, but no, he's not that much of a shark because he's not even in Parliament anymore. Maybe a bit himself, right? But and those are the ones who do know what's going on and are savvy, and they're creeping, and gradually doing these little changes and adjustments, just nudging it, and they're just nudging us out, right? And flowing it in till you get to that point where like Dominic Cummings said, it's just all scripted, and they're just rolling it off. And then Carla Denyer's like going, oh, well, I got chose for a committee and I got to go in there, and she was telling us what happened in there. And, she was saying like, oh, I did get to give a bit of input and feedback and make some recommendations, but not as much as I thought, and so forth. And that, I think that there are key workers, masterminds behind it, and they're sort of like the ones who are throwing the suggestions and nudges in, and they give the other MPs a little bit of room to sort of like kind of maneuver and do their own stuff, but while at the same time they're not quite savvy. And if they do get too savvy, and like Andrew Bridgen, they get elbowed out, like Jeremy Corbyn, but Corbyn's managed to cling on, even though he got muscled out, and that's the way it goes. That's just the way it is. But they're sneaking and creeping all the time. But maybe that is party politics and what it is. But it's meant to be surgery, like a doctor's surgery, and it's meant to have some impartiality to it. Can you imagine if they banned all complaints, communications, petitions, or requests that weren't kind of like from you had to be a member of a party? Like if you weren't a member of like the Conservatives or Labour or the Lib Dem, if you hadn't signed up to be a member of that party, and they all vote for the leader and they all chuck around their own policies, right? And then you have to get it approved by the party itself, kind of like when you used to get petitions approved by a jury. You see, that's it. Because when we had the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, right, you could go into a court and you could get a court order that you can do it, right? And surely if a jury had passed it and approved it, then how can it be wrong? How can it not be up to standards? If you've been into a court and a jury said, yeah, you can do that petition, right? Then how could the petitions committee say that it's not up to standards? It'd be a little bit like having an election petition and then the court making a verdict, sending a report to the speaker, and then the speaker has got to have an election petition, right? And, see if they get 10% of the votes, like if an MP's been naughty. But can you imagine if the court sent the report and the speaker said, I don't accept this report from the court? He's got to do. It says, upon the receipt of a report from a court, the speaker will initiate a recall petition or whatever it says, right? So if a court had ordered that a petition to the Commons could go ahead, right? And it doesn't have to be 3 justices. You could have a grand jury, right? Which is like local people, and they might not be members of political parties. They might all be independent or random. Then how could the speaker say no? How could the Petitions committee say, no, we're not going to publish it if it had been approved by a jury in a court, right? They couldn't. And that jury's maybe picked at random, so, it's not like the Labour Party are approving it, or the Conservative Party are approving it, or the Lib Dems, right? Could be random, right? How can the Speaker or the Chair of the Petitions Committee turn it down? Just like the Speaker can't say to a court, unless they have a hearing in Parliament, which they can do. They can have hearings in Parliament. They can warrant them in Parliament to have an investigation, but they don't want to screw each other over. They don't really want to administer justice against each other, because it's all, that would spoil the airs and graces and the honourability of it all and everything, unless it's Boris Johnson or whatever, who's had an illegal newspaper column. This is while he was Prime Minister, which is entertainment, providing entertainment to the public. So, this is it. It's, I don't think that Parliament has necessarily got bad people in it, but it's like the health. The way I see it is that as the average shape of the human body has suffered since, like the 1800s, 17, 1800s, we know there've always been people who are, slightly bigger than other people, right? But we know that statistically, it's, we've lost our figure. Generally, it's gone because of the lifestyle, right? And that's a little bit like what's happened to the intellectual capacity. It's just slipped a little bit generally across the board, right? People aren't quite as, they're not quite as focused, right? And that's what's happened in Parliament. And that's why we've got these problems and why we don't have all these kind of like, Baron Denman characters and like, it's like Sherlock Holmes, it's like an episode of Sherlock Holmes type thing, they were just a little bit more, they were just on it a bit more, right? With the awareness of what's going on. Just like, people were a bit more fitter. Generally people were fitter, right? And they were obviously and a bit more sharper. And we lost that edge now, and we're suffering from it in Parliament. And in between all that, there's some sharks who are trying to take advantage and elbow other people out, and then there are other ones who are genuinely trying to sort things out, but they're not fully informed on everything, right? And maybe some of them are informed and they're not being honest about it, and maybe some of them truly aren't informed, but because there's a mixture of it, it's difficult to sort it out, But as for, I've gone back onto Parliament again now. As for YouTube, right, I'm quite sure that if it was 1984, 1983, I don't even know if we had computers then in 1983. I don't know if people were on the internet. I forgot. I don't think there was the internet as it is now, but there was sort of like those Atari games and stuff like that, and possibly even those Microsoft computers. I think people were making like, those Frogger games and stuff like that, tennis, beep, beep, tennis games or whatever. But it's like when you went into the court to get the consent, right, and you got that order, you could get it put in the newspaper, because without that order, you couldn't have it in the newspaper not to collect signatures because it was illegal. And once you got that order, it's like, I think that order had some kind of like authority, like when court orders that something has to be published, has to be published in at least one newspaper, because you got the order from the court, right? And to make it official, right? So like, because you got consent, and because it was in the newspaper, it wouldn't have been in the newspaper without the court order, right? So if it gets put in the newspaper, actually underneath it at the bottom, like I've got some of those from like, the Queen's ceremony thing, it says like, hereby ordered by whatever court or justice or whatever underneath it, right? So that being in the newspaper with the order from the justice, I mean, how can it not be in the newspaper when it's got the order from the justice in, and then people know that you've got consent? So it's like, if you get stopped by the police, right, then you can say, oh well, it's in the newspaper. It's like official. That's the whole point of why things like that had to be in the newspaper, and then you given notice, right? To the police force, know that you're doing it. They can't doubt it. Um, Same with road closures and things like that. It's in, and remember, if you didn't have consent, it couldn't go in there. They used to have a lot of these lawyers, night lawyers, doing the newspaper, right? And they worked, and there's a whole thing with the right to petition, this whole kind of like 1688 Bill of Rights and so forth. But that's why newspapers used to be a bit funny and fickle about what you can and can't publish when it was legal. And they used to say, oh, you'll need a lawyer or legal advice. We've got to check whether it's lawful or not, because actually you couldn't actually do it. Ironically, if you didn't need to put it in the newspaper because people just wrote them out by hand and got a few people to sign them, you actually had more protection and complete and total protection if you didn't put it in the newspaper. You didn't need to. That's just if you want to go larger or whatever. When you start getting then you start getting into things like suffragettes and Luddites and miners' strikes and all that type of thing going on. But you don't need to do that. You could just do your own thing. As long as you're doing it legitimately and send it in or whatever, just as if you're doing whatever. But now it's kind of like with e-petitions, it's kind of like undermine the whole thing because there's so many people doing it, and they want to try and keep control. But we've never had as much technology and communication, so I can't see why there isn't more. At least there's never been as much ability for the government to check things, rather than like all those William Penn books. They were forging like writs from Parliament and going into court and just like they were buying forgeries of writs, right? Well, I guess it was more important then because you might end up going to be hanged or something like that. So could have been a matter of life or death. But then again, if they found out it was forgery, then it might be more death than life. But I'm convinced that's why William Prynne got his ears chopped. I'm sure that 1628 book was by him. It's not attributed to anyone, that book. I've tried to find out. It tells you who published it. It doesn't say who the author is. It's strange and unusual that it's 1628. That William Prynne had been about 28 years old. Would he have been at Lincoln's Inn then? He ended up getting into a lot of trouble later on in life. There's a book published that actually publishes like the form of the writ of parliamentary privilege. And then there ended up being a lot of copies going around. So it's starting to make me wonder that maybe it was he did it, and that is the real reason why he ended up getting put in prison for 3 years in various castles or whatever, and had his ears chopped off. Although he did get pardoned later on and become an MP, but he doesn't. I don't think I've actually read him say that he did that book. But I read his petition where he's petitioning about his release and so forth. But now I found that book and it hasn't got an author attributed to it and the time that it was published. And actually, he went and published like the form of the writ for everyone to copy it. I'm starting to think the thought crossed my mind that it might have been the real reason why he ended up getting locked up, or they weren't happy about it, and then he ended up this massive campaign about freedom, free men and freedom of speech or whatever, the rest of his life. People have he didn't actually particularly break any law or whatever. Or he claims that he didn't. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, freedom of the press in America. If it's freedom of the press, then how can a newspaper write a policy that was binding upon someone? Newspapers surely can't have a policy which can discriminate against anyone, And I'm certain that law is meant to reflect kind of a little bit like the Public Meeting Act, although it's before then. But it's the same principle. It's like transacting. You're not allowed to be prevented from transacting information in the meeting, and I think that's what the basis of the. In fact, I wouldn't have been surprised if they copied that off the American Constitution, that Public Meeting Act, transacting, and they probably got the idea inspired from the constitution for that. I wouldn't have been surprised.